They will either be changed, they will either be reduced, or they will be lost completely and removed.
Blaise, welcome back. Great to have you back. Would you be able to give us a bit of a summary on your carnivore journey so far?
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Dave. So my carnivore journey started at around 2022, and I found Anthony Chaffee at that time. And Anthony Chaffee taught me a little bit about phytotoxins, and I learned from his videos. I saw one of his very first videos on that and his huge presentation on that, and I found it really interesting. So I went full throttle. I went all in on that, and I was like, I want to see how well this works because I've been looking for something really badly, and I want to see how well it works. And obviously, during that entire time, my mom went, "What? This is ridiculous!" So she threw a fit. She threw a giant fit. It was quite. It lasted for even a couple days actually, and by the end of it, finally, she sort of calmed down to it, and she saw that nothing bad was happening, and in fact that I was doing better. So she was fine with it. And it so far has lasted about 2 years, so 2022 to 2024. And around the same time, I also saw a video related to not brushing your teeth, and I also went full throttle on that. So that's another weird thing that I ended up doing. And I also, the 2 years before that, I tried this not showering thing because I saw some Australian doctor, and he was like, "I haven't showered in 5 years, and I am perfectly fine." And you see his perfect, immaculate skin, and I was like, I might as well try something. So there's definitely some interlinked things with carnivore and all of those for some reason. Um, so definitely with brushing your teeth, I noticed that was a really big one. But when it comes to not showering, I noticed that just odors in general are far less. Flatulence is also far less. Um, Hair definitely improved significantly. So there's definitely a lot of improvements just from carnivore alone, and just the entire change in the lifestyle, which was pretty good. I'm glad.
So, yeah, awesome. So last time I spoke to you, you were in the same time zone as me, but now you're in a completely different time zone. What's happened in the last few weeks?
Well, I moved from Korea back to the United States, and I did experience a little bit of jet lag. It was definitely at first it's a little harsh because Asia from uh, North America, it's a really really big time difference. So basically when my dad is sleeping, I'm like wide awake, and he's looking at me and I'm looking at him, and he's like, "Man, stop making noise like so late at night," or like, "Please," like, yeah. So I have to keep it. I had to keep it down originally, and yeah, but I got over it pretty quickly. I noticed as well because I did a lot of traveling in my past. Carnivore actually speeds up how quickly you get used to jet lag. Usually, for me, anyways, before when I used to travel a lot, jet lag lasted about, I'd say, like a week or sometimes a little longer. And in when I was carnivore, it only lasted 3 to 4 days. So I'm assuming that has something to do with hormones and probably cholesterol synthesis and a couple other things.
Awesome. So there's something that came up from your last interview that I'd like to ask you about. So, and I should have asked you about this at the time, and I was kind of, after I saw all the comments, I was kind of beating myself up afterwards, thinking, why didn't I think of this? So, you mentioned the no showering thing in the last interview. How many days has it been?
It's been about I know for certain it's been about over 1,432 days, but
Uh-huh.
lost track after that. I just stopped counting. I know it's around 4 years or somewhere there, because I know I started in 2020.
Right.
So yeah.
So the question that seemed to come up a lot in the comments was like, what happens if you get dirty? Like, let's say you're out and you fall over and land in a puddle and get mud on you, or a car goes past and splashes water on you, or something like that. Like, what do you do in that situation? Like, you just kind of towel dry, or
So in that case, it depends on exactly the situation, but just for water, usually when it comes to water, I'll just like get a towel and I'll like wipe it off. But there are some things that I might like be a little bit more careful with. So, for instance, when you're cooking, and especially if you're carnivore, you're gonna be dealing with blood a lot when you're cooking, possibly, and when you're opening maybe the package, or you're just eating it in general, and you might get blood on you. And blood, I know, or at least from my dad's profession, anyways, because he's a medical technologist, he works with that a lot. And there's a thing that blood is a really good medium. It's like a good thing for bacteria to grow in. So if I, for instance, like if I get blood over my clothes, then I know like I probably should like wash it immediately, or like at least wash it, because I know that it's a really good medium. But if it's just water, I usually wipe it off with a towel. If it's like quote unquote like dirty water with like dirt or sand in it, I usually don't have a problem with that either. I just wipe that off with the towel as well. If it's mud though, and if it's really really granular, then I probably wouldn't want to get my towel dirty, or have to really clean my towel, because it'll get the towel, it'll discolor the towel a lot. And I have all white towels, sadly, so I don't want to deal with that. So I probably, at that point, I would probably just go in the shower. I would wash off whatever part it was, but if it was like my leg, for instance, was just completely covered in mud, then I'd wash off my leg. If it was my back, then I'd wash off my back. But I would avoid just water as a general rule, and that mostly has to do with contaminants in the water. I have a video on that, but I'm not gonna talk too much about that.
Cool. Well, thank you for thank you for that. So
Clarifying.
yeah, thank you for clarifying. So the other thing we were going to talk about was related to things like economics and carnivore. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah. So I believe that in the future, and this first, I have to say where this future, this foresight comes from. So I play a game a lot that's related, that's very important in foresight. It's called League of Legends. It's sort of like chess in a way, and you have to see a lot of moves ahead in the future to succeed. And in North America, I was ranked 27, so very very high out of 10 million people. So it's a really really big thing, and I took it really seriously. If you don't have like really really good ability to see the future and like predict moves, then you won't be good at this. And I sort of looked at that, and I was like, maybe I could apply this sort of like like similar foresight ability to just like carnivore itself, because I always like looking into the future and like seeing what the possible futures could be, and it's just something that's interesting for me. And I came to a lot of conclusions. One, carnivore is, I believe, inevitable. It's bound to happen, and it's bound to happen simply because agriculture is just unsustainable. I also believe that carnivore is bound to happen because of expenses and costs. So, especially in the United States, anyways, expenses and costs are just absolutely through the roof. I mean, there are so many expenses and costs that are ridiculous. It also comes down to, I believe, if when we end up correcting misinformation. So a really good example of correcting misinformation, like just in the past, would be the whole thing of doctors saying like, oh, smoking is healthy. That's a really healthy thing to do. And they even had like these advertisements of like doctors advertising cigarettes. So I believe when that ends up happening as well, there will also be a change in votes, and that'll just cause this giant cascade and this whole thing to go about. So that's one of the things that I plan on talking about and into more detail. But we have to, before I do any of that, we have to first understand just how effective carnivore is and some of the science behind it. So I'm not going to go exactly into all of the science behind it, but I'm just going to be explaining some of the really big things that it cures, or just flat out prevents. And there's a lot of I mean, I have a video on this if you're really interested, but it's really really amazing how well carnivore works. So just when it comes to like weight loss, for instance, weight loss is like guaranteed, and that has to do with the insulin to glucagon ratio and the activation of hormones such as the lipase, which allows visceral adipose tissue, or basically white adipose tissue, visceral fat, to like be used and be removed and used as energy. So that's one of the reasons. So that basically removes Ozempic, for instance. Just imagine each one of these things I say removing a prescription or a drug or some sort of a treatment required from a doctor, like an oncologist or radiologist when it comes to cancer. And that would be another one. It prevents cancer, and that has to do with the fact that cancer is a metabolic disease in the first place. So the way cancer ends up happening is, or from what I'm basically understanding, is a dysfunctional mitochondria and that whole process. And Thomas C. Fried proved this as well. So if you put a dysfunctional mitochondria into a healthy cell, it becomes cancerous, and then if you put a healthy mitochondria into a dysfunctional cell, it doesn't become cancerous. So it's like this sort of like big thing. He did a really really good work on that. So big props to Thomas Seyfried on that, because it just proves it even more. Carnivore obviously prevents that because you're not using glucose as a fuel, you're using fatty acid. So immediately you can remove like oncologists and radiologists as treatments needed. So, and I won't go over all of them, but I'll go over a little bit more, and then you could just see like how many jobs this might affect. And I have a list. I'll go over that eventually. Acne, I also believe that it basically cures acne, and I have a little bit of science behind that. I don't have exactly all the science, sadly, because even dermatologists don't know the full science behind how acne works, but I believe it has to do with inflammatory signals, DHT, and cholesterol, which is related to DHT is related to cholesterol, and there's a couple other things. I have a video on it, and I also like vitamin deficiencies. So supplements basically get removed. You don't need supplements. There's so many things that this just keeps adding on to over and over again. And on top of that, I also think that it increases lifespan. You can probably live until 120, maybe even 150, possibly even longer, based on some research. So I found that also really, really amazing. And I think that has to do with it's related to collision theory and how stable glucose is versus how stable fatty acid is. I have a little bit of video on that as well. So there's I try to educate as much as I can, because I believe that the only way to make the future good in this case is through knowing and through education, and of everybody, not just the young people, but the old people, and as many people as you can get, really, because you need to change the votes, because you have to change like who's elected, you have to change all these small, really small changes have to happen in the process, because if it ends up happening all at once, it becomes a revolution, and you never want a revolution usually, because at the end of a revolution there's always a worse government that ends up being set up instead of a better government. So I would prefer this not to be like a big all at once thing, but a slow change thing. So yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, when you look at it like that, it when you think about all the jobs involved, all the industries involved, if even if this is a slow, very, very gradual kind of change, I mean, it changes everything,
Yeah,
right?
it
So
it
what
does a 180.
happens? What happens to people's jobs? What happens to industries that are relying on? I mean, to be honest, there are industries that rely on people being sick.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, so I talked a little bit about that before, where I believe that, and it is actually sort of already shown by the SDA, the Seventh Day Adventists themselves. They sell the poison and the antidote, so they're profiting from both sides, similar to sort of like what happened in World War II, when one company, I think it was Ford, sold to both sides, both to the Germans and to the Americans. And I mean, it's a double profit. You're making like really, really big money here. So it's a really big thing. And if you go carnivore, then you're just reducing their profits. And I don't have all the numbers when it comes
Sorry, could
to.
you explain the Seventh Day Adventist one in a
Oh,
little bit
okay.
more?
Yeah. Um, so the Seventh Day Adventists, they're basically a religious group, and it originates back to Kellogg's. So Kellogg's had his, we'll just call him this lady that he found very, very enlightening, and she said, and she came up with the revelation, and God gave this to her, that meat is the cause of horniness, and we must remove meat from the diet. So we got this very strange. That's the whole point of why Kellogg's was made in the first place. Kellogg's cornflakes, and that the cereal brand itself was made for that reason, was to prevent horniness. And as you can see, like it grew quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot of money behind it, even if it's not necessarily for the same religious reasons. It's quite a bit of money. They own so much. It's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of money there. Fast food. I mean, if you just remove a lot of those jobs and a lot of the processes that come with it, you could, like, in total, the number that I came up with when it comes to jobs lost just based on the healthcare sector, not even including like all these other ones, and agriculture, I estimated it at 541.25 million, which is a lot of people. I mean, there's only like 8 billion, I think, people on the planet. So you're already taking like a 16th of the population, and that's a big that's a big number. I mean, assuming that they end up having some sort of job problem or changing jobs, or basically their profession becomes like not needed anymore, then you could sort of see where like a little bit of a resentment or anger might come from, and then hopefully that doesn't go in the wrong direction and it changes. Like they have enough time to sort it out. But if there's enough people like that all at once, then I would rather not see a revolution.
So, where do you see that going? Like, where, how does, if assuming people get healthier, people start saving money, but that also means people are out of work, industries don't function the same way anymore. Um, what, how does that move over? You know, what are the new industries? What are the new jobs that come out of this?
So I think that there will be a lot of jobs. I'll first go over the list of jobs that I believe will be lost in the process, or either they will either be changed, they will either be reduced, or they will be lost completely and removed. So one second here, let me find the list. It's such a long list, I can't memorize this. So okay, the jobs that I believe will be affected, and these are just the ones that I'm quite certain of. There probably are way more, just based on how economics works itself. It's like a domino effect. So you affect one, you hit one domino, and then this giant cascade ends up happening. So the jobs that I think are going to be affected are the agricultural sector, the entire agricultural sector. So that has to do with crop farming, agricultural laborers, seed producers, food processing, entire agricultural equipment and service jobs, the supplement industry, chemical engineers, so specifically biochemical engineers, biofuel engineers, textile producers, that's related to cotton and hemp, specifically textile producers of cotton and hemp, environmental conservationists and environmental and conservation, that sort of whole thing, the healthcare and wellness sector, so basically the entire healthcare sector, the doctors, nurses, hospital staff. So I'm going to go over a list of doctors that this probably affects. So just expect this to in the future, at least. I don't know if it'll be by 2050 or like 2100, or if it'll be earlier or later. This is all based on climate change, but just remember, this is like almost guaranteed to happen, just because of the fact that agriculture is unsustainable. So, this is a long list. Oncologists, radiologists, pathologists, hematologists, surgical specialists, specifically in cancer, endocrinologists, gastroenterologists, urologists, dermatologists, pulmonologists, pharmacists and pharmacy technicians, palliative care specialists, psychiatrists and psychologists, dietitians and nutritionists. Medical schools and universities will also have to change their curriculum and a lot of what's taught, because a lot of what's taught is like glycolysis is the primary pathway. And I mean, based on carnivore, no, glycolysis is not the primary pathway. Gluconeogenesis is. We already know this through a multitude of factors. I have a really good video on that. It's a lot of detail if you're interested in the whole science behind it. Medical research, health insurance, life insurance, public health professionals, mental health professionals, specifically related to like anxiety, depression, BPD, I mean, there's schizophrenia, like tons of these things end up getting majorly helped, if not cured, by carnivore. Alternative therapy for wellness and medicine, fitness instructors. And the reason I say fitness instructors is because most people will finally realize that weight actually is a diet thing. It is not much of a exercise thing. And that has to do with the insulin to glucagon ratio and hormone sensitive lipase. The pharmaceutical industry, biotech firms, regulatory bodies, and policymakers.
I'm just imagining this big pile of treadmills in the dump.
Yeah, that's gyms are probably going to get affected a little bit more than they would think by this. Once the misinformation is corrected, it'll switch really quickly. And I mean, maybe people will just want to go to the gym because they have more energy, but for people who don't, I mean, it's a lot. I think it's going to be affected a lot. Regulatory bodies and policymakers are also going to be affected. The WHO, the FDA, the EAP, the EPA, the UNEAP, the FAO, and OSHA are going to be affected, I think. Local zoning and planning commissions are going to be affected as well. The food nutrition sector, food engineers, process engineers, legal professionals in food and regulation safety. So that's like lawyers in that area. So animal welfare lawyers, as well as grocery store owners, culinary, tourism, supply chain and logistics, education and research, educators, academic researchers, marketing and fashion are also going to be affected. And I think that mostly has to do with like weight, but there could be a couple other things related to like plant agriculture being used to make certain clothes. Fashion designers and retailers, I think, are going to be affected as well. Travel and tourism, travel agencies and tour operators, legal and social services, legal professionals in the food and regulation safety, animal welfare lawyers, nonprofits and NGOs, science and social science as well, because a lot of people's behaviors change on carnivore, and like their natural emotional state usually changes. So I noticed that a lot of people are really, really calm on carnivore in comparison. So there's a lot of things like related to hormones and that get really, really affected when you're not on carnivore. Social scientists, so basically that ends up affecting like by social scientists like anthropologists, sociologists, and psychologists. And I think biologists and ecologists as well are going to be affected. I mean, those are just the ones that I'm like pretty sure about, and that adds up to 541.25 million, but there's probably more. So yeah.
It's just, as you're reading that list, it feels like we've just built industries and jobs around people being ill or
Yeah.
solving problems for people that are only problems because we're taking advice from, the people that, want to solve the problems too. They're giving you, hey, do this. Oh, you got sick. Okay, I've got a solution for you.
Here's the antidote. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it looks pretty rough around that end. There's a lot of other factors that I think are going to play a role into affecting the future of this. There's no way agriculture is sustainable. I'll explain a little bit more about that and how it works and why. I'll also explain like why carnivore is inevitable. But but before I do all that, I will first explain how I do think there will be jobs created. I don't know how many jobs are necessarily going to be created as well in the process, but I do think there will be jobs created, and as well as this being a new biological revolution for humanity. And the reason I say that is because when this happens, so all those doctors, all those healthcare people that I said before, now assuming that they do lose their job or it's like significantly reduced and most of them do lose their job, then they're going to have to do something. And based on their profession anyways, most likely what's going to end up happening, I think anyways, is they're going to have to do something related to healthcare and that sort of thing. And I believe that because there won't be much to do besides improving upon what's already perfect. So we already know like the perfect process. They're going to have to do something. They have to. So they're probably going to end up going into things related to how to live longer, much longer. So they'll probably be focused when it comes to science specifically. Like just a really quick example is they might engineer the Rubisco enzyme for a lot of other plants to be really efficient. So instead, the plant grows much quicker, and 25% of the time, it doesn't have to spend energy on detoxifying products, unnecessary damaging products it creates, which is a really big part of almost every plant, actually, because every plant uses the Rubisco enzyme, as well as, for instance, they'll probably improve human lifespan, and that'll come down to a lot of metabolism processes, and most likely it'll have to do with reducing reactive oxygen species. So we already know that in complex 1, reactive oxygen species are created. So if we reduce that somehow genetically, or we do some genetic engineering, or we end up finding like basically that sort of line, they'll end up focusing on that thing, and they'll probably end up increasing lifespan in the process. So I don't know how long humans are necessarily going to live in the future based on like if we keep adding these things up. But I would guess, just based on what's currently known, is I would assume it probably, for each metabolic process minimum, you'd probably increase lifespan by maybe a couple years, maybe months. But if you keep adding that up over and over again, it might increase. And some of them might be much bigger than others. So it all really depends on the way everything works in terms of collision theory, I think. And collision theory has to do basically, I explained a little bit of this before on my other video, but collision theory is where there's 3 really important things in collision theory: the frequency of collisions, the activation energy, and the orientation of the collisions. And if we just apply this theory to glucose versus fatty acid, we will immediately, like really quickly, we will see that fatty acid is very stable. Its activation energy is very high, so it's not going to react, and therefore it's less likely to produce these reactive oxygen species and such, and all this other stuff. And glucose, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. It is very easy to react. It's a very low activation energy. So, and as a general rule, it's pretty polar, especially compared to fatty acid. So it's much more likely to react, and because of that, it will reduce lifespan. So if we move everything in terms of more stability, we will increase lifespan. The biggest one, I would assume, has to do with erythrocytes requiring glucose. If you can manage to fix that, if you change that somehow, I don't really know how that's possible, but if you do manage to change that, that would probably increase lifespan dramatically. That would probably increase it by like many years, because you would be reducing a lot of the damage to the endothelium, and you'd be reducing a lot of damage to basically every part of the body indirectly because of that. So there's a lot of it's really, there's a lot of potential. I just don't know how that's going to be done in the future.
Wow. I mean, I like the idea of extending lifespan.
Yeah.
As a 50-year-old, or as a nearly 50-year-old, I like the idea.
Yeah. So before I go maybe a little further on into the science, I'll first explain why all of this is inevitable in the first place, and why this is bound to happen. So this comes down to a couple things. One of them is the fact that we have a very difficult time with climate change, and climate change will cause many different kinds of damage. It could cause ocean acidification, which will cause damage to the wildlife in the ocean, which will basically reduce the stock that we can eat from when it comes to fish, which increases food prices. And then that whole problem could end up happening. It could really damage like tons of ecosystems in the oceans as well, because ocean acidification will acidify the calcium-based species, and the calcium-based species are what a lot of these they are the bottom of the food chain. They are one of the people at the very bottom of the food chain. So a lot of animals require them for food. So that's going to end up happening. There's going to be an increase in natural disasters. That might be droughts. It might be hurricanes. There's tons and tons of things that will end up happening. And another really big one that really particularly hits the land sector and not the ocean area, is desertification. And land will end up being desertified. And desertification is basically just a simple way of saying land turns to desert. So usable land is slowly becoming desert or turns to desert. Now, this, by the way, has happened in the past. Civilizations have collapsed in the past due to either desertification or droughts, which end up leading to reduced crop yield, and then that compounds on itself, and huge problems happen. Literally civilizations collapse. So just a couple of them to name them would be the Mayans around 900 AD, the Akkadian Empire, which is around 2500 to 2000 BC, if I remember correctly, and the Old Egyptian Empire, which is around, I think, 2400 to 2200 BC. So all of these civilizations, they have collapsed in the past. So like, it's not like this is a new thing in human history. This is like, it has sort of happened in the past, related to crop yields, and basically loss of crop yields leads to reduced civilization, and then it just, yeah. So it's definitely doesn't look good on that end. Now, the reason I say carnivore is mandatory in the future is because the way that this is going to happen, and the way that we can actually sequester a lot of the carbon in the air into the ground, is through using herd animals. And that means we have to eat them in the end as well. So that's part of the process. But we already know, we do have one person who's managed to do this, and successfully, multiple times. His name is Alan Savory. And Alan Savory, he basically came up with this planned grazing method. And he was also taught originally that cattle and basically livestock are the cause of desertification itself. And he ended up, he has a really sad story on that. Actually, I'm not gonna say that. It's pretty sad. But in the end, he ended up killing tons of basically, you can call them livestock or wildlife in this case, and that didn't even fix the desertification. It only increased it more. So he was like, that's something he'll bring with him to the grave, and he's just gonna have to deal with that. Like, he killed a lot, and just to try to prevent it, it didn't end up preventing it. So he wanted to find another way how to fix this. And contrary, it's very, very against what a lot of scientists believe as correct. And it's basically just, you throw tons of these herd animals. I mean, you can take like 25,000 of them, just tons of them basically. And if with his method of planned grazing, what you're doing is you're stomping the hooves of the animal, are killing any plant life that might be like residual, and it's growing, but it's not like actually useful anymore. As well as they basically dung all over and pee all over their own food source in the first place, so they have to keep moving, and they can't eat there. So that you basically repeat that process a little bit. And just as an example of something that really did end up working, related to Alan Savory and his method. So there's this guy, I think his name was Alejandro Carrillo or Casillo or something. He's an Argentinian researcher, and what he did was he and Alan Savory worked together, and Alejandro was documenting the desertification of the lands of Patagonia, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And Alan Savory basically said, okay, you know what? Let's just take 25,000 lamb, or I can't remember what it was, which livestock it was, but he just took 25,000 of them. And and in 1 year, they increased the productivity of that land, basically like how much grew by 50%, which is a really big number. And in the process of making more plants, what happens is the plant is taking CO2 from the atmosphere, and it's converting it into like usable material, so for itself. And that was a really, really big thing, because if you look at that just as a small experiment of something that worked dramatically when it comes to reducing the amount of CO2 and the whole climate change thing, you're going to realize just how quickly how big this can be if more people catch on and then they're like, oh, okay, well, not only is carnivore better for my health and like many other things, it also prevents climate change, and climate change is going to affect my wallet because I'm not going to be able to pay for that avocado anymore or whatever plant anymore, because it's going to cost too much at a certain point. Because if we look at it just as of right now anyways, based on the data that we have, I think by 2050, if I remember correctly, 12 to 14% of the land, agricultural land specifically, will end up having diminished returns, like significantly diminished returns, and about 10% of the land will end up being eroded. Basically, the topsoil will end up eroding, and that affects the crop yields as well. So it's this real, and now this happens naturally with agriculture. I mean, we've seen desertification in the past. This is in Africa. This does exist in Africa. That's why part of Africa is slightly desertified. Not all of it is, like, thank God, but there's definitely a part of it that is desertified. Now, some of that has to do with the equator and like how the sun is positioned and stuff. But there is another part of it that has to do with desertification. So I think that's going to be a really, really big factor. It's going to be unsustainable at a certain point, because when food prices eventually get too high, then you're going to have to do this. And hopefully this doesn't happen at like a head stop where just all at once it's like, oh my God, we need a solution right now. And it's not like we're doing this slowly, because if that ends up happening, you got to realize how many agricultural people are going to lose their jobs in the process, and this whole cascade will happen. So hopefully this happens slowly and education is done properly, because I mean, if you don't, I really would prefer not to see revolutions around the world. I don't know which countries this is going to affect exactly in particular, but I like 500 and like a 16th of the population of the world. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of people. So it's, yeah.
So, one of the arguments I guess you'd probably hear from people pushing back on this kind of idea is, how is this going to be possible to, like, this idea of regenerative farming, and then how can you do this at scale?
So, just when it comes to, so I don't really know when it comes to the population specifically. I don't know how many people this will be able to feed, but I do know that this is probably, it's bound to happen, just because of the amount of damage that it will cause in the process. There will be, I mean, there will also be like flash flooding as well, and tons of these places that are basically borderline sea level are going to get flooded. There's a lot of things that are going to happen all at once. So I don't know how many people this is going to feed in particular, but I do know that it's bound to happen. I do think that they're probably at some point eventually. I don't think technology will fix this completely, but I think technology will basically like put a band-aid over like a giant flesh wound or a bullet wound. So it's going to end up like helping or at least delaying the damage that agriculture does. So there might be like some processes that you can do that will slow it down. So for instance, you can use like your own compost, which is one of them. I forgot what, there's a specific name for that, but that could be one of the things. And I do believe that it's like, it will help slow things down, but I don't think that it'll stop things, especially with the rate of like CO2 that we're producing. Yeah, I really wish I could tell. Well, okay, so there's there's this weird thing that ends up happening at the same time around that time. At around the time that this whole process, I think, is going to start to like be a little bit pushed forward in that direction. There will be demographic implosion. So that basically means a lot of the population, the older population, will end up dying off, and that's because there's a lot of people in China. Just as one example, I mean, there are tons and tons of old people in China, and they implemented the one-child policy, and then suddenly they're having like huge problems because they have tons of these young people who have to work and provide, because of these like social programs, maybe for instance, for even more of these old people. So maybe there's like 100,000 young people, and then there's like 10 million old people that they have to take care of. And just from a demographic standpoint, in terms of like demographic implosion, that's going to happen at around the same time. So there's probably going to be something there. I don't know like again, I don't know how many people this can feed, but it will definitely, just based on demographic implosion and that whole thing, I do believe that it'll probably reduce the amount of people needing to be fed. I couldn't tell you though the exact number, or how many people it can feed, but it's I don't necessarily know how we can get more efficient food. People might end up making like more efficient food, but we already tried with like plant-based meat, and that doesn't work because there's a lot of reasons. But like a reactor does not have its own immune system. Like that's a really big part of making your own meat. Like when you literally synthetically make meat, it's, again, bacteria can easily grow in it, and it requires extreme sterilization. So unless that giant container that's basically like incubating tons of meat is really, really sterile and perfect, there's a pretty good chance that if it doesn't have an immune system, which giant hunks of containers don't have an immune system, it's not going to end up being able to produce meat. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, nothing really makes me happier than hearing that the fake meat is not really going to go anywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it costs way too much. Some guy made a video on it. It was a really good video. It's like just the cost level. I was like, oh man, they're just bleeding money. I mean, they're bleeding so much money. Bill Gates in particular, he's bleeding a lot of money.
I just wonder what the idea is behind it. Like they're thinking at some point it's going to get to where we can scale this up so much we can make money with it or something. It's
Yeah. Yeah. So, and probably actually that's sort of like a disinformation sort of part, which is one of the second points that I think is bound to make carnivore happen. And it's when disinformation ends up being corrected, and it ends up becoming correct information. So that comes to like doctors. Again, doctors used to say, hey, the cigar is really healthy. I really think that you should have this cigar because it'll definitely improve your health and your teeth as well. I mean, it's really good for you. And eventually that will be corrected. People will eventually learn, and they'll go, oh, wait, that wasn't true. And then like that'll cause this whole cascade of people voting differently, and tons of these. I think that's also going to be another cascade event. And that'll also come down to people learning and finally realizing that cows and livestock are not killing the planet. They're actually saving the planet. So all these people who are basically like, oh my God, cows are killing the planet, they're terrible, even though they are necessary for the carbon cycle to function correctly, or just any sort of herd livestock animal, that's going to end up being changed. And all those people who were once basically denouncing cows, or get it, like, please, they are bad, they will finally go, oh wait, cows are great, they are amazing, they are good for the climate and climate change. So it's going to be this, like, I think that's going to be another factor that ends up making carnivore inevitable and bound to happen. So yeah.
so a more related to, I don't know, philosophical or human behavior kind of question. Do you think that there'll ever be some of the people that are, anti-meat and you're you're killing this, you're killing that, you can't do this, everyone has to go plant-based. Do you think they'll ever change, or do you think they'll just move on to another cause that supplants vegetables, and they're still anti-beef?
That's a really good question. I think that all comes down to education and whether or not they're educated correctly. So, if they know that they're indirectly saving a lot of animals in the process of eating the cow, because the cow is necessary for life to grow, and then like it provides a habitat for many other animals, and then like it's this whole giant process. So, if they end up being educated and public schools or just schools in general, as long if this catches on into schools, then I believe that there is chance for change, for any sort of vegetarian or anything like that, because I believe it all comes down to education and whether or not you're educated correctly, and how the school system is designed as well. That's a complicated and weird one. But an example, just a real quick example, is like a lot of school systems are designed to tell you like, yes, you're right, no, you're wrong. It's not designed to tell you like, okay, here's like when you get your test back, that's the best example of here's you are right and you are wrong here. It's not really, all it's doing is sort of testing your intelligence when it comes to memory. It's not really testing your cognitive flexibility, which is a really, really important kind of intelligence. I believe that there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence, and to list all of them out is too difficult because there's just too many, and there's probably so many that I would never know until I see a different perspective of that kind of intelligence. So that might be like muscle memory. It might be another kind of intelligence, like how kinesthetically, like, are you really athletic? Do you have good hand-eye coordination? Memory is obviously one kind of intelligence. It could be cognitive flexibility. It could be whether or not you're able to create, like, what kind of ideas do you come up with? How well are you able to link things together? That's part of my channel anyways, is like linking things together, because I believe that it's all this information is just scattered all over the internet, and it's just this giant mess, and you're supposed to like sort it out yourself somehow, which I gotta be real. Anybody who spends that much time on the internet is crazy. And yes, that means I'm a little crazy, but still, like, you gotta be really crazy to spend that much time on the internet sifting stuff out, because it's exhausting. It's really exhausting. And then not only that, you sometimes like have to literally test it yourself by doing it physically. So that's where the whole not showering and not brushing your teeth comes from, because you'd hear that and you go like, that's absolutely ridiculous. And I thought the exact same way. I mean, I used to shower and brush my teeth the entire time when I was like growing up. 0 years, I think it was when I was born, since 20 20 years old. I mean, it was a complete game changer. So it's all based on education and what people are taught. If they're taught like what to think and not how to think, then I believe that there is a change, and there is definitely a very good chance for vegetarians and many other people, even carnivores, to change in some aspects, because like nobody's perfect, and there's always some way you can usually make yourself better. You can improve upon, maybe you're a little volatile and you get angry at people very often, right? There's always like something you can improve upon. So yeah.
So just on this point, I'd love to know your opinion on this. Recently, I've found out. I always thought that one of the most important things for anyone to learn is how to be a good critical thinker. And I thought, well, when I send my kids to a school, I want to make sure I'm sending them to a school that encourages critical thinking. Right. The only
Yeah.
problem is you can send your kids to a school that will encourage critical thinking, but it will only encourage critical thinking within the paradigm that that they want you to think about things critically.
Yeah.
If you think critically outside what they think you should be thinking, well, it's no longer critical thinking anymore. That's wrong.
Yeah. 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 So that's yeah. Oh, that's a good one. That's a really good one. Yeah. Oh man, there's a lot there. So man, when it comes to critical thinking, it's really difficult to find. Like, I think, oh, there actually, maybe there was one school that I was aware of. I can't remember. Oh man, I wish I could remember their name. I think they're somewhere in Texas. I think they are probably one of the best examples when it comes to critical thinking. Or I mean, yeah, that it was really good, because they have, I think it's a previous military veteran, and he has like a whole philosophy on this, and he like explains who he does and doesn't allow into the school based on it. And I looked at it and I was like, this person, like, if if this catches on, which I'm not entirely sure how quickly it'll catch on, but I think there might be like some ability for it to catch on. I don't necessarily see a reason that's like forcing it into that direction yet. I don't see anything that like mandatorily states that this will have to go there. So I hope it ends up going in that direction. But with his school, if it does end up going in his direction, I think a lot of kids are going to be able to think critically, and it won't just be all about like, okay, this is what the doctor tells you, this is what the dentist tells you, this is good, this is bad, this is like, I mean, that whole notion is just going to like, people are going to start really thinking like for themselves, and a lot more like critical thinking of, oh, like maybe there, why do I always feel like tired after I eat a burger, for instance? Maybe why do I get this like little feeling of narcolepsy? And then like a little bit of critical thinking might go on. They might get curious, and then they might look it up online. They'll try to find answers. It'll be like really difficult because you have to sort through all of this misinformation. But at the end, if you like really keep sorting through it and you keep testing these statements that people are making, then you'll eventually get to the end answer, and you'll be like, oh, okay, this is why this is working, or this is why this isn't working. So, man, that's critical thinking. In today's day and age, you got to teach it yourself. It's too like you said, there are so many parameters for it. So,
Sadly, it becomes something that you've almost got to. Critical thinking is almost a thing you've got to stumble upon yourself. You know, you can't assume that. You just got to observe what's going on and then go and then stumble upon the idea that perhaps something doesn't feel right about the way people talk about things. It's all right to question this, but this is off limits and that kind of thing. And it happens everywhere, whether it's in school or, as we talked about, in medical or whatever it is, you know?
yeah, all the time, I mean, yeah. Um, Yeah. So, oh, and when you said medical, there's a third point that I think that this is going to sort of be forced. Why carnivore is forced to happen, and it's because when it comes to the future, and based on just the current like scale of things economically, and like how there is starting to be a much bigger difference between the rich and the poor, and the middle class is getting squeezed further. In America, anyways. I don't know about the rest of the world, but it probably is somewhat similar. I think that people are going to have to start like budgeting a little more. And I think that carnivore might end up actually being a budget diet, which sounds a little weird. But when like insurance, like health insurance costs like an absolutely absurd amount of money. I mean, I think yearly it can cost like up to $25,000 on a family plan. And that's, I mean, I don't know about you, but that's a lot of money. So I think that
That's
if you just increase,
crazy.
yeah. Yeah. So if you just apply that to like
If I'm paying, sorry to interrupt, but if I'm paying that much
all good.
money for medical insurance a year, I'm going to make myself sick so I can use some of that, you know?
Yeah, so I've even like personally, this is a really truthful thing. Some people have come on my channel and they've asked me like, hey, I don't have like health insurance, like because I can't afford it. Like what should I do on carnivore? Like what are the foods that I'm looking for? And just the fact that I saw one of those comments, it's like I can't afford health insurance, like that immediately threw me in for like a, this is bad. Like that's a huge amount of money. That's a absolutely absurd amount of money yearly. I mean, anyways, that's assuming you're on a family plan. There's like single plan. I mean, insurance is so unbelievably complicated in the United States, but just the amount that it can get to is ridiculous. And then depending on how much you use it as well, because there's this whole like out of pocket maximum, and once you reach this certain limit, which is like for some plans it's like $9,000. So once you pay $9,000 of your own money, then finally the insurance company will pay the rest and be like, oh, okay, now we'll start paying for everything. So it's like this weird, it's really this weird system. I don't know why this is all a thing, but it's just when I heard that comment, I was like, ooh, this is not looking good, because that immediately made me think like this person is resorting to carnivore to reduce the cost of health insurance. This is absurd. This should like, I mean, so yeah, I think it might end up being a budget food, which is a little weird. And if it does end up becoming a budget food, for people, then that will cause this cascade effect where eventually down the line, more people need meat, more people are asking for meat. So then a lot of these plant products end up being like supply and demand. They end up getting replaced, and they get replaced with meat products. And if it happens slowly, then like, yeah. So you can sort of see this whole thing happening again. And man, that it was just that one comment. I've had a couple people ask me that, but just that one comment hit me, and I was like, oof, this is not, this is, it's gonna happen. So that might be health insurance, it might be prescriptions. I mean, there's tons of costs that are just,
Mm.
it's going really high in the United States. Yeah.
To be honest, I think that's why we need to be, very kind of loud and proud about carnivore, because we have to we have to clearly be drawing the link between eating carnivore and having better health, because people actually need to see that. They actually need to see, well, actually I can save money with the food that I'm eating, plus I can potentially save money on my prescriptions. I can potentially save money on the amount of health insurance I've got, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because like when you use health insurance, it costs money. And let's just assume that even if you do keep insurance, you're still like, even if you're carnivore and you're keeping insurance, you're still paying less when it comes to that out of pocket maximum, because you're never really going to the doctor. You're never going to like a physician. You're never going to any of these other things. And just based on like the average American, when it comes to the average American spending on healthcare, I think it was like $13,000 per American. So that's a lot of money, because assuming that people like the average American also only makes around like $59,000. And if you take like 59 divided by 13, well, we could just assume maybe that's like almost around a fourth, a little more around like a fourth or a fifth of their money. It's going straight into healthcare. And that, I mean, that's bad. That's really, really bad. So
And that's best case scenario, assuming that 59,000 is after taxes.
yeah. I did not actually remember if that's the after taxes amount or before, but I'm pretty sure that's not the after taxes amount. I'm pretty sure that's, oh, so
And I'm not sure the tax rates in America, but even assuming they're not as exorbitant as they are in Australia, it's still, take out taxes out of 59,000, then take out 13,000 in health insurance, and you're not left with a whole lot to live on.
yeah. Yeah, so there's
Mm.
this, I mean, people feel it. Like there's a really good reason. And that's, I also have a video coming out on this, on like why I think the future generations are hopeless. It's a little sad video. I do think there's like some hope that can be done, but as a general rule, they've been squeezed pretty badly. Young people have been squeezed like, it's really, really bad. I have a video coming out on that, but if you're interested just seeing somebody who's talking about that right now, his name is Scott Galloway. He does a really, really good video on that. And when I saw that video, I was like, wow, this is not looking good for any future generation coming up, because the amount of money, like that's not just including the debt ceiling in the United States, which is just ramping up. Like it's really, really increasing. Like debt is just money that must be paid off, and it's future, you're borrowing future money. So when you have a debt ceiling of like $39 trillion, like $50 trillion, I mean, you're gonna have to pay that off, and that takes time, and that also takes taxes. So like I mean, it's not looking good. It's really not looking good. I know that the tax rate as well, taxes are increasing in America, I think, which is like really crazy to me. I mean, as if the corruption isn't already pretty bad. I don't know if you've seen, there was a oh, this one's bad. I think there is a senator, and he was basically talking to this army general, and he's like, "Why are these $100 bearings for jets $90,000? Why did we pay $90,000 for this?" That's that, like that level of corruption. That's an $89,900 profit in terms of like being corrupt. Like whoever they sold that to, clearly they're profiting big time, and that's just the one that's like known. There are plenty of very big cases of corruption that aren't known. And this this comes partially from like working for the government a little bit, as well as somebody who has like somebody on the inside of the government. Yeah, so it's like there are some very obvious cases of just like flat out corruption, and it's not really like there's nothing being done about it. So it's really not looking good. The future generation is, and that's not even talking about autocracy, like how governments are becoming more autocratic and less democratic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah, it's a minefield. But yeah, well, on that light note,
That light note.
on that light note, can you tell us a little bit about your channel and where we can find you?
Oh yeah. So recently, I have changed my name of my channel. So it used to be called Learning Something New 6463, but as you can see at the bottom, it's just at Blaise V, which is basically my name. So Blaise Vanderploeg. You just have to type in at Blaise V on YouTube, and you'll see a guy. He's sort of looking like, or something like that, as my profile picture. So I talk about a lot of I try to do everything related to education. It doesn't really matter the topic always. I do like to talk a lot about carnivore and interlink things a lot with carnivore, because I believe that carnivore just it fixes so many problems. I mean, whew, it's really really amazing. But I also talk about like love and relationships. I have a video on that coming out. I have a video on um, why the future generation is hopeless. Yeah, I said that one. That one's a little depressing. I have a video coming out called the catastrophe of carnivore, which is like a little bit of I talk about what I talked about in this video, except I go into a little more detail. I have a video about me not showering and not brushing my teeth for not showering for over 1,400 days, 4 years, and not brushing my teeth for over 700 days, 2 years. So I have a lot of videos, definitely all like really really different topics. I try I try to be as broad as possible. So I'm just gonna say this like as like what I'm trying to do with my channel. The whole point of why I'm like making all these like broad categories in terms of the video is because I'm trying to reach as much of an audience as I can possible. Whether that be young, old, it doesn't matter who it is. I'm trying to reach as many people as possible, and I'm trying to link it to education in some way because again, I like I said before, I believe that education is like needed in order for all this change to happen. Because if you don't have education for all this change to happen, I don't think you're going to get change. You might get change, but you'll get it in the wrong direction, or you'll get it like a change in terms of like Lenin dying and then Stalin ends up being the leader. Like that's not a good change. It is a change in like government, and it's a big change, but it's not one that you want. And that's because like I mean, I think we all know Stalin and the I mean the amount of people he's killed is absolutely ridiculous. So I try to be as educational as I can on my channel. I also plan on talking about lifestyle videos, so stuff related to my lifestyle, like what I'm going to eat. So I have a video that I plan on making on that as well. That might be like what kinds of meat might, for instance, some people have like problems with their stomach when it comes to carnivore. If you sort of get where I'm going. So originally at first, so I try to like show them what I eat in for instance and what helps like my stomach because some people might have IBS. There's a lot of factors that could influence digestion, but I just try to I try to be as educational as I can on my channel and teach as many people as I can. I'm trying to reach as broad of an audience as I can. Hopefully there's a time where eventually I can make money on the channel, because if I can make money on the channel, I can do exactly what Mr. Beast does. And Mr. Beast just takes all of his money and he throws it right back into the channel, investing in the channel. So eventually, if that does happen, I can make higher quality videos. And if I can make higher quality videos, I can probably reach a broader audience. And if I can reach a broader audience, more people know. And if more people know, like it's this whole cascade effect. But it's only from one person. So it's like it's a small sort of cascade effect. But if you look at this from a larger scale perspective in terms of like how many people are doing this, so there are a lot of people who are trying to be like advocating carnivore. Anthony Chafee, Elizabeth Bright, Ken Berry. I mean, you name it. There's tons of them out there, and I think like they're pushing in the right direction. I'm trying to also push in that direction. I'm trying to do as much as I can in order to really get the change going, because I believe that this doesn't like fixing the world. This is sort of a selfish reason of why I'm doing this as well. I'm not doing this just because like, hey, I really believe that people need to be healthy as well, and like that whole thing. Like, yeah, there is some ethics and more moral standard there, but I'm also partially doing this because if this doesn't happen, it probably like endangers my life as well as the future of my kids, and when I have kids, anyways, and their kids and their grandkids, because climate change is going to be a really big thing. Government autocracy, like I do not want to deal with any of that stuff, and free speech getting cut out or things being censored and restricted. This affects my life as well. This doesn't just affect like my children and my grandchildren, because I don't want to have to deal with government autocracy. I don't want to have to deal with climate change and the extreme damage that's going to come with it, as well as the increase in price and how that's going to affect my future kids, because they're going to maybe have less money because of that, and they're going to have less their environment might be messed up. They might not even be able to go outside as often anymore. They might not be able to play outside. There's tons and tons of things that will just completely, like, you have to I just want you to understand why, like, the reasons I'm doing this. It doesn't just have to do with like, oh, I'm a very nice and ethically good person. This also has to do with the fact that this literally affects me, like, and my kids. So, and I can see it coming. There's no question about it. Especially when it comes to government autocracy, it's not looking good. It is not looking good. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll link to your channel in the show notes below. Blaise, thank you so much for coming back and sharing more information with us. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Dave. I hope everybody learned something.
Okay, I'm gonna